Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? That's right. We are checking in here live for the June 15, 2025 episode of the Boxing Source Podcast. Yeah, that's right. We are here. We are live, whether it is on YouTube, on Facebook, or on Rumble. We are here live for you. We got a number of things here that we're going to be talking about, as we had some action that was at the theater at Madison Square Garden yesterday that involved a world title fight there in the main event and a title eliminator there that we're going to be talking about here in this particular episode. And then we're going to have a couple of more topics that'll be pushed or sprinkled out there over the course of the show. Hopefully, we'll be able to get a little bit more into those topics here. And if you're there, of course, participating in the live chat, regardless of where it is, maybe I'll be able to address some questions that y'all may have when it comes to the sport of boxing here. So, we got a number of things here that we're going to be talking about. Of course, with the main event that happened at the theater at Madison Square Garden, you had Richardson Hitchins in the ring against George Kambosos Jr. for the IBF super lightweight title there at 140 pounds. And this was the first defense for Richardson Hitchins there in the 140-pound division, right? And, well, I mean, he pretty much dominated George Kambosos Jr. in that particular bout, man. And eight rounds of a beatdown, as they would say, 8 rounds of a beatdown. Richardson Hitchins, had the jab working. Jab was very sharp from round one. It was very sharp from round one. And George Kambosos just didn't have any type of answer for that jab. He attempted to try to get within range and throw counter punches, whether it was upstairs or to the body, but it didn't necessarily work. And a number of times when he was trying to be first against Richardson Hitchins, Hitchins was able to slip or, block a number of those shots there. So it was it was like George Kambosos did not belong in the ring with them. And according to a good number of people, George Kambosos shouldn't have been in the ring with Richardson Hitchins in the first place. Given that George Kambosos had one fight there at 140 pounds against Jake Willie over in Australia earlier this year, when he was originally signed by Matchroom Boxing. They had the announcement there from Matchroom saying that, hey, he'll be there and they'll compete at the super lightweight division. And when I initially saw that, I'm like, oh, man, they might have him in position to fight for a world title. And with, at the time, you had Richardson Hitchins being the contender before he fought and defeated Liam Parrow for the IBF belt. So it could have been either Hitchins or Parrow, who was also from Australia. And, well, here you go. One fight for George Kambosos, and he already was in the picture there to fight for a world title, man. And it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy on that front. You know what I'm saying? But it is what it is. You had Kambosos there in the ring against Richardson Hitchins, and, well, he ain't do much of nothing. I don't even know if he really pinched Richardson Hitchins in there, man. So, I mean, that's what we, got there. So, I mean, we got this thing right here. Says Hitchins styles on George Kambosos and knocks him out with a body shot. Could Hitchins be considered in the top of the division? Well, I mean, you have 140-pound division out there, 4 champions there for the IBF, WBC, WBA, WBO. You have former world champions that are on there, as you have multiple former world champions, particularly with the WBA belt and also the IBF belt. You got guys like Subriel Matias is a former world champion. I mentioned Liam Parrow, former world champion. Isaac Pitbull Cruz, former world champion. Raul Valenzuela, former world champion. And of course the current world champions there. You got Teofimo Lopez. You got Gary Antoine Russell. You got Subriel Matias in here with Richardson Hitchins. So with Hitchins getting this performance against George Kambosos, I mean, he could be considered there amongst the top guys within the division. But the thing about it is that, man, George Kambosos just got himself in a spot that, not a lot of people were able to get. Maybe the only person I would say that has those type of opportunities, but never really won a world title in this particular sense, is Joet Gonzalez. Because, man, if you talk about somebody that had a whole bunch of opportunities to fight for a world title, Joet Gonzalez is that person, man. Like, he fought, Shakur Stevenson. He fought Emmanuel Navarrete. He fought Luis Alberto Lopez, and still was able to get world title shots, man. And yet he wasn't even a world champion. But with George Kambosos Jr., he had that one win over Teofimo Lopez by decision. That one win pretty much like got him in that position to get all of these opportunities. If it wasn't for Teofimo Lopez, man, I'm telling you, man, he wouldn't have been in this position in one way whatsoever. And it's like, come on, man, what are we doing? Shout out to my guy Smitty in the building, man. He said Hitchins messed up with that after fight talk. Yeah. But we'll talk about that here in a minute. Yeah, because he does need those big fights here at 140 pounds. But it just depends on the situation there. As one of the key things that was brought up at that post-fight interview there in the ring was that Richardson Hitchins mentioned that he's a free agent, which is kind of wild. While Eddie Hearn was right there in the ring with him, that was funny, and you had that. And then you had the thing there as far as like who Richardson Hitchins is trying to go after, which also I felt was pretty weird because the fighter that he called out was not even or is not even in the division that he's currently in with the world championship belt. You go ahead and you had this fight here against George Kambosos Jr. You pretty much embarrass him over the course of 8 rounds. You ended with a stoppage win. Props to him for that because that was what I was looking for from Richardson Hitchins in his bout against George Kambosos. I didn't really think that George Kambosos should have been in the ring with him in the first place, And so with him being supposedly levels above George Kambosos, he did what he was supposed to do and ended up getting the stoppage victory. Now, with that being said, Richardson Hitchins calls out a fighter that's not even in his division. That is a former world champion in 140 pounds, but is now campaigning, it seems like, at 147 of the welterweight division in Devin Miles Haney. Yes, I said Devin Miles Haney. Okay. Yep. Former undisputed champion, 135 pounds. Former WBC super lightweight champion, but had his last fight in May, beginning of May, there, Cinco de Mayo weekend against Jose Carlos Ramirez at 143 pounds. So he's not really going to be competing at 140 pounds from this point forward. Like, I don't see it happening. Not happening. Shout out to Jay Pylon in the building there. Shout out to you, man. What's good with you? We just here live with the boxing talk and all of that here for the Boxing Source podcast. So Richardson Hitchins openly calls out Devin Haney while Bill Haney is there in attendance and everything like that. And I'm like, what in the world is he doing? You had Teofimo Lopez, the WBO champion, there at ringside. He goes in the ring, and you mean to tell me that you couldn't have a fight between Hitchins and Teofimo Lopez? Yes, I do know that Keith Connolly manages both of those fighters, but you could have something where it could work out a deal, everybody getting money. If a promoter could do it, make it happen, a manager could make it happen. That's a unification bout that could happen right there in Brooklyn or New York City or Manhattan or whatever. But they were talking like, oh, they don't really want to go ahead and make that fight when that fight makes the most sense there at 140 pounds, especially if you're going to have Teofimo Lopez still there at 140. And Teofimo ain't really having a fight lined up here at this particular point. He's just bouncing on, looking like a court jester, saying that he's having a Premier Boxing Champions hat on. Now he's over here, talking with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing and all that type of stuff. Nah, just go ahead and just make your intentions known that you could go and fight for unification, because he hasn't had a unification bout at 140 pounds yet. Here you got Richardson Hitchins that's right there available for you. Why not go ahead and do that? But nope, you didn't see it there on T.O.'s side, and you didn't see that there on Richardson Hitchins' side. That doesn't make much sense. At least it doesn't to me. You have a impressive performance by Richardson Hitchins, getting a knockout victory there against George Kambosos, and your stock is like, now you could have some stock as far as like being one of those guys to look out for at the top of the 140-pound division, and yet you're going after somebody that isn't quite in the 140-pound division. That really doesn't make much sense to me there on that front. But still, he's one of those guys there, Richardson Hitchins, that could be one of the more talented fighters there around 140 pounds. So that's the thing about it, is you could have him there performing at 140 pounds and kind of doing his thing there with the IBF belt. In one of those fights that you could see, if it's not going to be Richardson Hitchins versus Teofimo Lopez, is a fight that some have kind of asked for a while ago, before both of these fighters were world champions, and that's Richardson Hitchins and Gary Antoine Russell. Yes, a WBA super lightweight champion. So we could have some good matchups that are out there within 140 pounds. You know what I mean? So I don't see why we can't make something like that happen. I don't know when the IBF has a mandatory due for this 140-pound division, but if you got some time, I would go ahead and have Richardson Hitchins go for a unification bout. I don't see why you couldn't have that happen. So that's mainly the thing there on Richardson Hitchins' front. Now on the other side there, you got George Kambosos Jr. Yes, he is the former unified lightweight champion, not the former undisputed, the former unified lightweight champion, of course, with his win over Teofimo Lopez. But ever since then, he's had loss, and then a win and a loss, or a couple of losses, and then a win and then a loss. So 2 losses to Devin Haney, 1 win against Maxie Hughes, a loss to Vasyl Lomachenko, a win against Jake Willie, and then this loss here to Richardson Hitchins. So you're talking about 4 losses in his past 6 fights. Come on, man. And remember, all of the wins that he's basically had from 2019, his fight against Mickey Bay, was either a win by split decision or by majority decision. So it wasn't really no clear wins that George Kambosos had all from 2019 up to this particular point. So, for some people saying hey, they say props to George Kambosos Jr., taking these fights and this and that. And he pretty much got the luck of the draw in some cases. Split decision wins, that kind of says that, hey, maybe you shouldn't have gotten a nod in these fights. Mickey Bay was a split decision. Lee Selby was a split decision. Teofimo Lopez, that was a split decision. Maxie Hughes, that was a majority decision win. You only had 1 unanimous decision win, and that was the previous fight against Jake Willie, who was a replacement opponent there pretty much the week of the fight or something like that. So I really don't rate George Kambosos like that. I'm just sorry. I don't rate George Kambosos like that, because you don't have anything that's a standout win for George Kambosos Jr., with the exception of that Teofimo Lopez fight. And as I mentioned, with that being a split decision, it could have been just one instance where everything could have kind of changed in that aspect. And we never really got to see a rematch between Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos Jr. So that just tells you a lot there on that front. You know what I mean? Shout out to Jordan Smith here in the building. Like I said, we just chopping it up with the boxing talk here on that front. But yeah, seeing Richardson Hitchins just stomp on George Kambosos there at the theater at Madison Square Garden, and you even saw instances where Richardson Hitchins was just like tagging him up. And he's like he's like talking to the corner. He's like, hey, stop the fight. Still tagging George Kambosos. He's like, stop the fight. They wouldn't do it. So he's like, okay, I'll take matters into my own hands and hit him with a body shot. Bam! Put Kambosos to the canvas. And, Kambosos was struggling to get up on that front. And, yeah, couldn't make that 10 count. And, good for him that he pretty much stayed down for that long, or else it would have gone a whole lot worse for George Kambosos Jr. there on that front. So, hey, Richardson Hitchins there with that stoppage win. Yeah, that's a good look for him, because that is something that, a number of fight fans are looking for from Richardson Hitchins here, after him getting this IBF super lightweight title. Shout out to L-Dub Boxing here in the building on the live chat, man. What's good with you, man? Boxing Plug in the building. Yeah, so now with him having that defense of the IBF super lightweight title, we just pretty much got to see, what could be next out there. And, I also have this question out there. What is the rankings for the super lightweight division currently? I did mention a thing there with the world champions that are there at 140 pounds. You got Richardson Hitchins with his first defense of that IBF title. You got Gary Antoine Russell, who won the WBA title on March 1st of this year at the Barclays Center with his win over Raul Valenzuela. You got Alberto Puello, the WBC champion, who had his last win there against Sandor Martin on March 1st, and has his next bout coming up on July 12th against former IBF champion Subriel Matias. And you got Teofimo Lopez there as the WBO champion. You know what I mean? Shout out to L. Will in the building, man. What's good with you? Like I said, with the 4 world champions there, who would you rate as the top fighter there at 140 pounds? Now, a number of people would say Teofimo Lopez, as he is the longest reigning world champion, basically there with the WBO title. He is the lineal champion after he defeated Josh Taylor a couple of years ago, right? But you do also have, there with Alberto Puello, who has that decision win over Gary Antoine Russell. I think it was split decision win there. Had another split decision win against Sandor Martin, who had a split decision loss to Teofimo Lopez. So you got Puello there, and I said Gary Antoine Russell, I think at least this year, has the most impressive performance there from the guys that have a world title there at the 140-pound division with his win over Raul Valenzuela, right? And then you got Richardson Hitchins, which you could say did also have a dominant performance there against George Kambosos Jr., but it kind of goes to either Gary Antoine Russell or Richardson Hitchins to have that impressive performance. Yes, Teofimo Lopez did have a win during Cinco de Mayo weekend there against Arnold Barbosa. Ended up getting a unanimous decision win. It's I don't know, man. But those are your 4 world champions, right? So it just depends on how you would do it. Some may say that Alberto Puello has, 2 of the more impressive wins in the division, at least so far. And if he has his win over former world champion Subriel Matias on July 12th, that he could have a case as the top rated fighter there at 140 pounds over Teofimo Lopez, as many would say, is the number 1 guy at this point. But, we'll have to see, because I want to see some type of unification happen soon there at 140 pounds. You know what I mean? It said, shout out to George Smith. He says, champions don't handpick guys with 7 losses. Hey, that's the thing. It's either that or, they have these voluntary defenses or whatever it is, because back in the day, you had these guys that were world champions that ended up fighting guys that had 7 or 10 losses or whatever it is, or 15. You know what I mean? Look at what's happening in the heavyweight division, right? Dylan White was able to fight for a world title. Oh, no, not even that. Derek Chisora was able to fight for, I think, the WBC heavyweight title, and he already had about 10, 11 losses there against Tyson Fury. So, I mean, there you go. You know what I mean? So it says, Illwell says, I think Puello about to lose to Matias. Hey, that's going to be a really good fight. I feel like that's going to be a really good fight between those two. Offensive guy, Matias, boxer, and Alberto Puello. It's going to be a good matchup. But, like I said, with Puello, he's had a number of close decision wins here in the past, couple of years. So if he's able to get through this particular fight here against Subriel Matias, like I was mentioning, he could end up being or have a serious case to be the number one fighter there at 140 pounds. Charles Cruz says that Puello beat Russell should have been a unanimous decision. Hey, I don't know, man. It was more about, a boxer versus a puncher there. So it was two contrasting styles at that particular point, and ended up being a split decision there for Alberto Puello. Now, Gary Antoine Russell, he kind of like, blamed himself on that. Said he was going to get right back in the lab, and he got the next fight there against Raul Valenzuela, and he didn't play around. And you saw what happened there at Barclays Center on March 1st, where he almost had like a clean sweep there on that fight. So we want to see here what's next for Gary Antoine Russell as well. Might be against Andy Hirioka. We haven't had anything locked in for that as of yet. You know what I'm saying? Big Supreme in the building. What's going on there with you? And so that's the thing about it, man. I mean, you got all of those fighters at the top of the 140-pound division. I did mention Subriel Matias as a contender there. He has this fight coming up against Puello. Andy Hirioka is number one ranked at WBA. There with Gary Antoine Russell is supposed to have a deal worked out. WBA had ordered that fight. That whole thing with the negotiations, 30 days have already passed. I haven't seen any updates from the WBA yet. They should have a deal, some type of deal in place. Might have the fight in September. Might be earlier than that. Who knows? So we got to see what's going on here with the 140-pound division. If we're going to have a number of these fights that have happened, we got, T.O. in May. We got Hitchins here, in June. Gary Antoine fought in March. Puello's going to be fighting in July. So we gotta see how all of that sorts itself out. Big Supreme says here when it comes to Subriel Matias, he says that Matias is more skilled and technical than he gets credit for. Yeah, it's more of like, he has that style where it looks like he's coming forward, high guard, and tries to, work to, get his punches in. As I said, the number of times he just makes sure that he hurts his opponents with every punch that he throws. That's why has like 100% knockout ratio still, as far as like his wins, right? So that's the thing about it, is that with Subriel Matias, he's there at like 22 wins with just 2 losses, and all 22 of his wins are by way of knockout. So he has that 100% knockout ratio when it comes to wins. And that's a lot that, Alberto Puello is going to have to deal with on July 12th in New York City. I think Puello is under Ismail Salas, if I'm not mistaken, as far as like his trainer. So we're going to have a good scrap there for July 12th. And I think, you know what, that might end up being a fight of the night there, July 12th. I think it will be. You know what I'm saying? His legacy remains. He says that, he said he's proud of Africa there, of his performance there yesterday. And, like I was saying, he had a dominant performance there against George Kambosos Jr. He looked like that jab, man. That jab was, they say that jab was crazy. And some people say that might be one of the best jabs in the game. Some people, talk about Devin Haney's jab. They talk about Jamal Charlo's jab. But you have, you have Africa there with that jab. And once it's on point, it's like, man, you ain't seen like an offensive weapon like that in a good minute. You know what I mean? Shout L Dub, he says that Pitbull Cruz versus Angel Fierro rematch is going to be for the WBC super lightweight interim title. Man. So you're going to have, they got Isaac Cruz there at number 3 in the WBC. And you got Angel Fierro there at number 11 in the WBC, at least currently. But it might be currently. I got to check if they had updated the WBC rankings there real quick when it came to that, because they usually have their rankings updated in the middle of the month. So I'm going to go on there to just real quick with the WBC rankings there, super lightweight. They do still have Andy Cruz there at number 3 and Angel Fierro there at number 11. So yeah, that's going to be still a good matchup. And their first fight that they had there, February 1st in Las Vegas, I was out there for that. That was a great fight. If it wasn't for the main event between David Benavidez and David Morrell Jr. being as good as it was, I would probably put Pitbull Cruz versus Angel Fierro as like my top 5 of the year so far. You know what I mean? I don't know. It might still be because, for that Benavidez, Morrell fight, the middle of that fight, it was more David Benavidez. And then at the tail end, you did have something there with David Morrell Jr. scoring the knockdown, but kind of like took that back by hitting Benavidez after the bell. So, yeah, I mean, that first fight, that was just awesome. So coming up July 19th with that rematch that's going to be there in Las Vegas, MGM Grand Garden Arena, part of that Manny Pacquiao-Mario Barrios fight card. Man, that's going to be another one to, really look out for, man. It's updated. They removed Manny Pacquiao there at 147 pounds. That was interesting, too, when they did that. I was like, wait a minute. Why did they remove Pacquiao there in the rankings at welterweight? He was like at number 5? He was like there at number 5 in the rankings, and then all of a sudden they removed him. So I don't know why they did that or what's going on with it. I don't know if it's going to even matter, or maybe it does, because the WBC has a little bit of a rules there for world champions and those in the top 15 of the WBC rankings. I'll just leave it at that. I'm gonna just leave it at that, okay? So that's the thing about it, right? But going back to what I was saying here as far as like those rankings there at super lightweight, there's a number of those fighters, as I mentioned, the world champions. You got the contenders there: Andy Hirooka, Subaru Matias, Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and like we mentioned there, Angel Fierro with their bout. You got Liam Power, as I said, former world champion. You still got Barbosa. We got to see what he's going to be doing here after having his first loss to Teofimo Lopez. So there's still a number of those contenders there at 140 pounds that could, really compete there. Because to me, at least to me, I don't really think that there is like a clear-cut number one fighter there at 140 pounds as far as like, being dominant, like from round 1 to round 12 and the number of their fights or whatever it is, being consistent with that. So I would like to see how that 140-pound division shapes itself up. Yeah. Well, Ill Will asks, they took him out because he about to fight for the belt, right? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it's more about, you're supposed to have your title defense against a fighter that is within the top, 15 of the rankings. So I don't know. They might add him. They might add Manny Pacquiao back on, or whatever. You know what I mean? So we do have that. Shout out to one and only DJ Nick Dash in the building, talking about Boots. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about Boots here in a bit. You know what I mean? So we're gonna be talking about him and his decision to go up one division here in a moment. But next up, man, I was talking about the fight card there at the theater at Madison Square Garden. In the co-feature bout, you did have Andy Cruz there in action, and he, ended up having a fairly dominant win over Hiranori Mishiro. They're getting a 5th round TKO victory there to become 6-0, and that was like an IBF eliminator there. And so he's in line to fight for the IBF belt, currently held by Ray Murataya there in the lightweight division, who was, of course, elevated to become full champion as Vasyl Lomachenko officially announced and put in for his retirement from the sport of boxing. So with Ray Murataya, he won his last fight, was the interim champion, now elevated to full champion. And hey, he could be right in the mix as far as like his first defense of that IBF belt against Andy Cruz. And well, Andy Cruz is someone that has been, of course, mentioned there within the 135-pound division, and I felt like it was a pretty good performance by him. Yeah, he did take a number of shots there from Hiranori Mishiro, but in the flip side, he made sure that he made Mishiro pay, especially with the right hand, because Mishiro didn't necessarily have his left hand up, so he had it down, and he was trying to move around and stuff like that, but still kept his left hand down, and all Andy Cruz did was just shoot that right hand, and that's what he got that first knockdown was 2 right hands. Bow, bow, just beat him up with that right hand, right? And so that just made Andy Cruz, look like he has been kind of building himself up as far as getting stoppage victories and things like that. So we'll have to see what's going to be next here. Gorgio in the building asks, who do you think wins, Ray Murataya or Andy Cruz? I'm gonna just say this, man. That's a good question, because Ray Murataya, man, I've been at one of his fights, or I've seen one of his fights, but that was back in 2021, right? He was on that fight card in 2021 at Mandalay Bay. So it's been 4 years since then, right? Since then, he's had wins over Jeremiah Nakathila, Tevin Farmer, and then had his recent win over Zoro Abdullayev, who was, I would say, an interim world title challenger, as Abdullayev had his own loss to Devin Haney, got stopped by Devin Haney at the theater at Madison Square Garden in 2019, right? But I feel like this is a good matchup there. You're going to have Ray Murataya there at 5'8", with a reach of 72. Andy Cruz there reached, he's probably had around that same reach at 5'9", but I feel like Andy Cruz is, much more, advanced as far as defense goes. It's just, I don't know if he has that complete transition from defense to offense yet. So I wonder if he's going to have more of a defensive approach against a fighter like Ray Murataya here, if they do end up facing each other, or if he's going to try to mix it up and try to, pick up the pace against a Ray Murataya to see if Murataya could be able to handle that pressure there on that front. So I think it's a good matchup. As of right now, I don't know what they're going to do with Ray Murataya, because at the very least for me, once he won the interim title there at that front when he defeated Zoro Abdullayev, I thought that they were going to have, a couple of defenses here and there before they put him in against maybe Andy Cruz, or at the time, Keyshawn Davis, when Keyshawn Davis was the WBO champion, right? But now with Keyshawn Davis having a title strip, with Vasily Lomachenko having a retirement, now it's more of okay, what are we gonna do here with Ray Murataya at this point? Says Big Supreme says he thinks that Murataya wins versus Cruz. Hey, I gotta see it happen. Particularly here with Top Rank, because of course y'all know Top Rank had the network deal with ESPN, and that particular deal ends at the end of July. So we have that fight card that's July 26th at the theater at Madison Square Garden. There with Xander Zayas. They're going up against Jorge Garcia Perez for the vacant WBO super welterweight title. And after that, you don't know. Did have something on the rumor report. Shout out to the rumor report. It says that as of right now, there's nothing scheduled in the month of August for Top Rank. So we got to see if they're going to have another move planned or what. Like I said, reach out to at least one representative there for Top Rank. Haven't gotten anything yet. Want to see if I could contact someone else there on that front. But I don't know if they're, able to fully disclose that at this particular juncture. But we'll see on that run. We'll see on that run. Shout out to Aunt McQueen in the building here on the live chat. It says that Murataya is dangerous early, but the longer the fight goes, the more you see it favoring Andy Cruz. Hey, that could be it. That could be it. I feel like Andy Cruz, as I said, is the better defensive fighter here if they had that matchup, and that he could probably make more of the adjustments here over the course of the fight. If that fight ends up being next, like I said, it could be for that IBF title there at the 135-pound division. And, we have more that's going to be going on with the lightweight division, as I mentioned, with Keyshawn Davis missing weight in his fight that he was supposed to have against Edwin De Los Santos, over 4 pounds overweight. So the WBO lightweight title is vacant. And then last weekend, you did see Abdullah Mason beat up Jeremiah Nakathila, where Jeremiah Nakathila was in the corner saying, "I'm not okay. I am not okay. I am not okay." I was like, yo, what is going on here? He's like, "I'm not okay." And then he bring the doctor out, and then the doctor stops the bout, man. And at the very least, man, I'm there ringside, and I'm like, hey, we got to see some type of definitive knockdown or something. And man, when he wouldn't go out for that round, man, I was like, oh, come on, man. But yeah, you got Abdullah Mason there at number 2 in the WBO rankings. You got Sam Noakes, they're at number 1 in the WBO rankings. And the WBO a few days ago ordered for negotiations to start between Sam Noakes and Abdullah Mason, right? And thing is, will they end up fighting next? Well, the word was, at least immediately after, what was happening there with Keyshawn Davis and the WBO title being vacant, did talk with, one of the representatives there from Top Rank, matchmaker there, Brad Goodman. And they were saying like, hey, at that time, he doubted that Sam Noakes would be there and be able to fight for the vacant WBO lightweight title. And so that they were going to go down the line. They're going to look at, the number 3 ranked fighter there in the WBO. And they doubted that was going to happen. Gabriel Flores Jr. is ranked number 3. And Gabriel Flores was with Top Rank at one point, but they ended up, letting him go. So they really feel like he was going to do it. And if I'm not mistaken, Gabriel Flores is supposed to have some type of fight here coming up, if not already, right? And the opponent that he has, it ain't all too high. You know what I'm saying? So that, he's supposed to be, he's supposed to already have the fight actually. But they ain't really looking at, Gabriel Flores coming up to have the fight there against Abdullah Mason if this thing with Sam Noakes doesn't work out. So they were saying maybe it's going to be Abdullah Mason versus Christopher Moufo, or whatever, that last name is, right? Moufo, okay? Moufo. How about that? All right. So we got to see what's up with that. They got about 20 days for that whole thing with the negotiations with Sam Noakes and Abdullah Mason. So maybe they could still work out something. Queensbury and Top Rank can work out something, and then we'll see what's going on. You know what I mean? Hill Will says, "A Mason will knock out Noakes." Hey, listen, Abdullah Mason is out there, man. As I said, in that fight against Jeremiah Nakathila, he was looking like he was just walking Nakathila down, and every one of those punches they just had bad intentions, man. You know what I mean? And he kind of reminded me of a fighter that was, in a division that's a couple weights up as far as like what he does. So, hey, I don't know. With Sam Noakes, of course, he's out there in the UK. He had his last fight in May over in Nottingham. But he's had, a couple of a good number of 12-round bouts. So he's been there against like Yvonne Mendy, Ryan Walsh, if y'all are familiar with, those fighters there that's been in the game. But he ain't really there to have a good matchup with Abdullah Mason. That's just like that's just it. It says Giorgio says, "Have not seen Noakes fight, but heard he could crack. Hope him and Mason can get it on next." I mean, you got Sam Noakes. Yeah, he does, have 15 knockout wins in his 17 overall fights there, undefeated. But hey, him against Abdullah Mason, I don't know, man. Yeah, we did see Abdullah Mason have the time where he got knocked down twice against Johan Gonzalez, whatever it was there the last time he was in Johan Vasquez, excuse me. Last time he was at Scope Arena, right? But since then, in his fights against Manuel James, Carlos Tellez, and here against Jeremiah Nakathila, like he's just beating these guys up. So I mean, I'm putting a lot of stock behind Abdullah Mason here to end up, if he fights for that vacant WBO lightweight title, he's gonna win that WBO lightweight title. So that's the thing there. Big Supreme disagrees. He says that Noakes beats Mason. It says that Mason has never been 12 rounds versus a contender. Hey, I mean, yeah, that's correct, but I just don't see that. I just don't see where Noakes could really give Abdullah Mason some issues here at this point. At least not now. I don't. But we'll see. I mean, you got Frank Warren. Frank Warren will be there to see if he can make that fight happen. He'll call up Bob Arum up, and Bob Arum, let me tell you something about this Abdullah Mason. He's a great fighter. Do you really want to put Sam Noakes in there against my guy Abdullah Mason? I don't think so. This is a good point. Everybody said Murtazaliev was food for Tim Tszyu. That includes me. I didn't say that. I didn't say that Murtazaliev would lose to Tim Tszyu, and Tim Tszyu just got beat up. He got beat down, man. You know what I mean? So hey, I don't know. But I'm just saying that right now Mason is kind of being closer to coming to his own there at 135 pounds. So for Sam Noakes, he's gonna have to really watch out here on this front, man. So I definitely want to see this fight coming up. Maybe you might see it. You might see it happen September 13th. Yeah, we did hear from Turki Al-Sheikh saying that he would like to have Abdullah Mason be involved in that fight card, of course, headlined by Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Crawford. That's supposedly going to be at T-Mobile Arena. There's been, some mention that it could be at T-Mobile Arena, therefore September 13th, but we got to, wait for at least, some type of reservation there from the Nevada State Athletic Commission calendar. And then, yeah, we'll see if that's gonna happen. You know what I mean? He said homie, being young, trying to get his lick back. He was patient in his last fight, even when he had him. Yeah, he sat back and beat him down more. Like the new levels of defense there with Abdullah Mason. Yeah, like he really learned from that fight against Johan Vasquez. I'm telling you, that first round against Vasquez, that was round of the year for me. He just got caught. We got caught too overly excited, too eager. And, his dad there, Valiant Mason, said, hey, you just got to stay patient. Keep the spacing there from, between you and Vasquez, and then you'll be able to, break him down. And that's exactly what he did there in the following round, and ended up getting a knockout victory there in the second round. And ever since then, like, he dominated against Manuel James at the Theater of Madison Square Garden in February. And on his 21st birthday against Carlos Tellez, dominated in that one. And then against Jeremiah Nakathila, we saw the same thing. So I'm really buying a lot into Abdullah Mason here at this particular point there in the lightweight division. Once again, big thanks for everyone that's listening live. If you can, hit the like button, hit the share button here if you're watching either on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, or all that type of stuff. You feel me? He said, hey, boxing is a theater of the unknown. Yeah, hey, what is it that Kevin Garnett said? Anything's possible. You know what I mean? So that's the thing about it, man. Anything's possible in boxing. It's just that right now I just highly favor Abdullah Mason in a potential battle there against the Sam Noakes. You know what I mean? So we'll see. It says a rocks with Mason, but he has not went through enough fire. Hey, that happens a lot, and sometimes some fighters are able to, step up when the moment comes, even though they might have only a few fights out there. and some might not be able to get through it. But hey, like I said, we got to see here with Abdullah Mason and Sam Noakes. I mean, the thing with Abdullah Mason is like he doesn't have those 12-round bouts, but he was in his second 10-round fight. The only thing that you probably could say on this front was at the time before Mason fought Jeremiah Nakathila, the plan was for Abdullah Mason to have 2 more fights this year before they were going to try to angle him up to fight for a world title. But given the current circumstance here with the WBO, now it's like they don't really have a choice at this point. You know what I mean? So you got to do that. Let's see. He said, Ant McQueen here in the building says, Noakes is a damn good counterpuncher. Although he's generally aggressive, he showed in the fight against Ivan Mendy that he can play the distance game too. So, yeah, I mean, it will make, like I said, it's going to make for a good bout there. You know what I mean? It said, Big Supreme said, Joannes Tellez be the game. Julian J. Rock Williams there, who's a former unified champion. Yeah, former unified champion there, 154 pounds, had that win against Jared Hurd back at George Mason University there, Fairfax, Virginia. But hey, Joannes Tellez was able to do his thing on March 1st at Barclays there against J-Rock, but he had a very impressive win of the previous fight too. So Joannes Tellez is somebody to watch out for in the 154-pound division, as he's there, one of the top ranked fighters in the WBA, and might mention him later on in this podcast. I mean, so yeah. Mentions Xander Zayas. Of course, Xander Zayas, as I said, going to be fighting for the WBO 154-pound title. He defeated a former WBO champion, Patrick Teixeira, and defeated Damian Sosa. I was there at that particular fight there at the theater. So you say you want to see Mason in those kind of matchups. That's the thing, because I wasn't sure what they were going to do as far as like the direction there for Abdullah Mason, because when he had the fight against Carlos Ornelas, he was supposed to be fighting Giovanni Cabrera originally on that fight card in April, but Cabrera was like out for injury, so they ended up having Ornelas as a replacement opponent. So after his bout against Jeremiah Nakathila, I was thinking that they would try to set up that fight or resurrect that fight again for Abdullah Mason. But now it's like, now what do they do? It's like you can't have anything else. You know what I mean? Maybe they would have had him fight like a Gabriel Flores or maybe a Yadier Herrera, or maybe, former WBO champion Dennis Berinchik. He's there at number 6 in the WBO. So you could have had, Abdullah Mason there against Berinchik. So maybe that could happen. You know what I'm saying? Although I do have another fighter there that's, been floating around that's undefeated in Albert Bell. So you do have that as well, right? That could be another potential matchup. But given that Albert Bell had all that happened there with Top Rank when he was there at 130, trying to get a big fight there at 130, couldn't get it. I don't see if he's gonna be, cordial of sorts, having a fight against a top ranked fighter in that particular instance. I just don't know. But that's another, possible matchup. But I don't even kind of see that, since both of them are from Ohio. You got Mason there in Cleveland. You got Albert Bell there in Toledo. And they've done work together in the gym. Really don't see that happening. Really don't see that happening either. But hey, with that whole situation there with the WBO having the title vacant, we'll see how that goes, man. Albert Bell and Raymond Ford were talking that talk on X a while back. But yeah, Raymond Ford is about to have his fight, right? So he's gonna be in what is that thing there? I think Queensbury has something that's set up for him there that's coming up as well against Anthony Kasasi over in Riyadh. That's going to be on August 16th that they have scheduled. So he's going to be in there against Anthony Kasasi. That's going to be a good fight there, man. It's going to be a really good fight. So, hey, you got Ray Ford out there at the super featherweight division, but he's going to still campaign there at the super featherweight division. You know what I mean? He says, like, he wants Mason to succeed and not be forced in a situation without the requisite experience. I feel you. It's just this whole situation right now. It's like, I mean, they got their hands up. They're like, hey, what can we do at this point? We can't put him in there unless, hey, we say, you know what? Let us wait it out. You could have Sam Noakes go up against another one of these guys for the vacant WBO belt, and then you'll try to move forward with that. But we know what the WBO usually stood for. Okay, what Bob orders. I mean, that was pretty much the whole thing. It's not just World Boxing Organization, but it's also what Bob orders. That's what that's what some people were talking about when it came to the WBO. That's why you usually have a number of top-ranked fighters end up having a world title and ends up being the WBO title. So, I mean, hey, they're looking to go for that WBO title here in the lightweight division, man. So that's what it was. It says Albert Bell fight anyone. Hey, I got to hit him up. I got to hit him up. I got to catch up with him. We got to get more. We got to get more action here with Albert Bell. He did have a fight over in his hometown, right? So we got to get him, back in the mix, in this 135-pound division. You know what I'm saying? So we got to see how we could get Albert Bell there in the picture as well. You know what I mean? Big Supreme, shout out Big Supreme here. It says Albert Bell is the only boxer I could think that was released because nobody wanted to fight him. Man, it was crazy. You had the action that was going down at 130, right? You had Shakur Stevenson, right? He was able to get in and get that world title fight there against Jamel Herring. Albert Bell was a contender at that point. Couldn't get no fights with those guys, right? Then, what was it? They had Emmanuel Navarrete win the title there at 130 pounds. And then try to see if you got Albert Bell at least fight for an interim title or something, right? And that couldn't, and they didn't even allow that to happen. It was just insane, man. So now he's up there at 135, and then see if he can have better luck at 135 pounds. So we'll see how that goes on that front, man. Man, I was going to think if I was going to open the phone lines or something, or maybe the chat or whatnot. So we'll see if we can do that here in a bit, right? But I wanted to go into this next topic here real quick. This is another part of the news here that really, though, you pretty much knew this for a few weeks, but we just held off and held off on the news in reference to this because we were waiting for this person to officially announce it. But his promoter of sorts kind of let it out the bag, and that's with Jaron Ennis. He's moving up to 154 pounds. Now the thing is, shout out to YSM Sports Media. He is scheduled to have a conversation with Jaron Ennis here later this week. So be on the lookout for that. But we pretty much had hints that he was going to do that for weeks now. But we was going to see if YSM could break the story, but they didn't fully go through with it. They said hold back. Matchroom had to do a couple things here and there. But now, Eddie Hearn let that cat out of the bag with that. Okay. Yep, Boots Ennis, who was the IBF champion, won the WBA title there at welterweight with his stoppage win over Iamana Stanionis. What he said, I've been at 147 pounds my entire career. I try to see if I can become undisputed. That ain't happening. We had this fight. Pretty much was surprising we had this fight against Iamana Stanionis to at least have one unification. He tried to get a unification last year. Couldn't happen. Brian Norman was pretty much injured anyway. And Mario Barrios, hey, the money was the money. So fought Abel Ramos for the money. Now you see that Barrios is there fighting Manny Pacquiao July 19th, hey, for the money. So now you're going to have Boots Ennis moving up to 154 pounds. We've had, people mention potential opponents out there like the IBF champion there and Bakr Murtazaliev. Murtazaliev has mandatory defense against Erickson Lubin coming up. Okay. You got maybe Sergey Boychuk, who really should have lost to Michael Fox. That was lost, and that was a knockdown. Okay. So you had that. We already know what's going on with the WBO. Xander Zayas is fighting Jorge Garcia Perez for the vacant WBO belt. We got Fundora going up against Tim Tszyu in a rematch in July 19th. So I'm thinking here's the IBF champion and the WBA champion there at 147 pounds. WBA, you unify, you're basically the super champion. So with that being said, Boots moving up to 154 pounds while being the WBA super champion at welterweight. He could potentially fight for the WBA title. And the interim champion right now is Yoenis Tellez, who, as we mentioned, defeated Julian J. Rock Williams on March 1st at the Barclays Center. So pretty much had that put out there and the rumor mill on the Boxing Source website. So we got to see if that could be the case here later this year with Jaron Boots Ennis. But him entering the 154-pound division is great. You know what I mean? I think it's a lot of action there at 154 pounds. Giorgio here says on the live chat that he's a bit sad about it as a boxing business prevented Boots from going for undisputed. He should have had his initial title shot a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, timing kind of, messed all of that up. He was pretty much in the position, what was that, around May of 2022. He had that fight over in Carson, California, right? And I was pretty much saying hey, he might have been, next in line or whatnot. But, we had to wait it out to see what's going on, to see what's going down with the top of the 147-pound division, of course, having an undisputed title fight. Had to wait until 2023, July 29, 2023 for that undisputed title fight. But with him being the IBF mandatory, after that fight happened, he called for the mandatory. He was waiting for Errol Spence, couldn't get Errol Spence. Waiting for Terrence Crawford, couldn't get Terrence Crawford. It is what it is. So once that happened, then he was like, okay, what is going to happen with all these other belts? Is he able to fight for them? Well, you see what happened on that front. You know what I mean? That's potentially it. That's potentially it. Real quick, got somebody here on for the panelists here to join here on the Boxing Source podcast. Of course, our resident chef here. I think he's just coming back from an event that happened over around his area. Shout out to resident chef Brother Terrell here in the building. What's going on, Brother Terrell?
Hey, what's up, man? I definitely just had to jump on. I know I'm late. Probably won't be able to stay on too long, but but just want to jump on and say thank you. Right? It's just for you making that contact, and that contact played out into something good for us, me and the team, and my artist Bozy. So thank you. It was a great performance. It was hot, but that's Florida. That's Florida. So
yeah, exactly.
But this didn't rain, but we had a good event, good turnout, a lot of vendors, a lot of just a good Caribbean event that people came out to. So hope we can keep having that going forward and being a part of that. So thank you once again.
Yeah, they had the thing there. Rhythm Music Festival was the first one that they had there over in the Tampa Bay area this year. So it was earlier today. And, I just, made a couple phone calls, hit up Brother Terrell as he, manages a recording artist there in the area there in Bozy Hitmaker, and, see if I could, put two and two together, and they were able to work it out and have our Brother Bozy there on to perform on that front. So, props for that happening, and we'll see if we could work on, get more there for Bozy to get on more of these shows here that's, out and around. the U.S. and stuff like that. So he had that on that front, man. And I know we had the fights that were going down yesterday. And you all talked about the thing there with Richardson Hitchins getting the win over George Kambosos, showing up and showing out in his hometown there, and getting a knockout victory, keeping the IBF belt there at 140 pounds. And now I want to see what's going to be next here for Richardson Hitchins. What were your impressions of him on that particular bout?
Well, my first question is for you, because you said that you thought that Kambosos would go to distance, right? Why do you think that?
Well, my thing was that I wanted to have Richardson Hitchins be able to dominate. We wanted to see, if you want to put yourself in there in the discussion at the top of the 140-pound division, that you would have to dominate George Kambosos Jr. in this front. And, even though he was able to do that, like for me with Richardson Hitchins, given his, previous performances, he, 10 O's people, 12 O's people, it's almost like, how some people view Shakur Stevenson. That's how, Richardson Hitchins has been in his previous few fights. We had a fight there against Gustavo Lemos where he did have to work a good little bit in order to get that win. So I wanted to see how he would do against a veteran there in George Kambosos Jr., even with George Kambosos Jr. having the record that he had in those previous 6 or so fights.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, I do kind of get it now, because Richard Hitchens is 20-0 and only 8 KOs, and that's pretty peculiar. So when you say with his fighting style, he typically would just dominate the rounds and things like that. As we know, with 8 KOs, it suggests that there's not a lot of power there. Either doesn't have power, he doesn't know how to sit on the shots. It's something like that where you don't have 8 KOs and you're elite on that top level and everything. So I kind of get that, but just for me, I just knew he's going to stop Kambosos. I think it would come via body shot, things like that. But nevertheless, he did that. So, but I want to talk about the kind of the lead up to the fight. Man, that's one of the main things why I love boxing. The press conferences, man. These guys, they talk so much shit to each other, so much. When you look at the heavyweight fight that's on their undercard, right? I think they got Terramona, I believe his name is.
Terramona.
Yeah, they got the black kid he fought. I forgot. I think I don't know what his name is, but just when you look at that face off, the black guy was like, "I'm gonna fuck you up," and you're totally confident in that. And then come fight night, and there comes a different result, and you're like, "Wow,
completely different."
Yeah, but just once again, that's why we have the fights, and that's why the fights actually determine the actual winner of the fight. Because even with Kambosos and Hitchison, a great back and forth with Hitchison trying to bet $50,000, bring that out to the press conference, causes almost a fight between him and Kambosos and between their trainers, things like that, and just a lot of shit talking, right? Yeah. But then again, fighting that comes, and you got to back up what you say, right? So that was just so interesting to see how that played out. But I just knew that Richard Hitchens would get to stop it. I didn't know how, but I just thought it's just his time right now. It's just his time. So I don't know how he's going to fight going forward. Obviously, we know when you fight more elite opponents, your knockout percentage goes down, and his is not even hot to begin with. But post-fight, that call-out he did get for Devin Haney, man, once again, why I love boxing. It's just mano a mano. You talk shit, and you got to go in there and back it up. But the way he called Devin Haney is just crazy. Even disrespectful to his father, too, on top of that. Once again, just crazy. So, I don't know what's next. Would it be a Haney fight? And you would think that someone with only 8 KOs, they would say, "Oh, bring that fight on." But I think that Hitchens might be really coming into his own at this point now with his career. So he's he definitely.
Now, how about this? you talk about the thing there with the call out that Richardson Hitchins did, and I mentioned it earlier before you got on. I just felt like it was weird that you're the IBF super lightweight champion. The WBO super lightweight champion is there in attendance watching you fight. You mean to tell me that you can't have a fight between those two guys in a unification? And y'all have the same manager? You know what I'm saying? I don't understand it. You know, shout out to Two Cents in the building and my guy Just Do Boxing here checking in on the live chat, man. We just chopping it up, talking boxing here on the Boxing Source podcast. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you got Teofimo Lopez and you got Richardson Hitchins. They're both world champions. Why not have that unification bout?
As we often say in boxing, of course I want to see that fight, but let that shit build. Let that shit build up, and that could be a big time main event by itself. And because you just said that same manager, right? So you know that the manager is concerned for the careers of both his fighters in that regard. So let it build up, and so because you want one guy's to come out with two belts in that regard. So let it build, let it build, let it build. That way, when it does happen, one guy fights, one guy loses, but both will be very well compensated for that. So,
well, I mean, with the thing with Teofimo Lopez, we've kind of had the history there with him. As far as like him asking for some crazy amount of money to have fights against Boots Ennis or Subir Matias, or the whole thing that fell apart here with Devin Haney. And the thing with him is that his last fight was against Arnold Barbosa Jr. And Arnold Barbosa Jr. was basically his mandatory challenger. So he wouldn't have to worry about any type of mandatories until May of next year. So why not, have this unification bout happen? I don't know what they can do as far as, like, as you said, potentially build up the fight there with Hitchins and with Teofimo Lopez, because them, as far as like draws or box office draws, just being honest, they ain't it. They ain't it. We had Teofimo Lopez fighting Sandro Martin at the big arena there in Madison Square Garden. That ain't really pulled nobody. He had his fight against Jermaine Ortiz in Las Vegas. That ain't really pulled nobody. He had his fight against Steve Claggett in Miami Beach. They ain't really pulled nobody. So I don't know what they could do in this particular instance. Maybe I could get more from Keith Connolly here later on down the line, but I just say with the 140-pound division, having all of these fighters that either have a world championship or have been a world champion, there's got to be a lot of mixing and matching in order to make these top fights at 140 pounds happen.
And you sure you don't expect Hitchison to turn around in June and jump back in the ring in August? Is that what you're thinking?
No, because who's fighting in August?
Well, then
fighting in August.
On our last show, then you mentioned the fact that Teofimo, he dropped something on Twitter for like a date in August, right? When that case, right?
But that's Teofimo Lopez being Teofimo Lopez. He to me, he's almost like a jester of sorts, because he puts on a PVC hat and talking about August 16th. I'm like, I don't see any type of progress for Teofimo Lopez fighting on August 16th. No, I just don't see it. So if he wants to just wait it out and then have a fight later on down the line, maybe at the end of fall or early, winter or something, or probably by November against a Richardson Hitchins, I wouldn't mind that. But the thing about it is that he has to, as of right now, to me, he has to humble himself and say that, look, I may have these wins and these titles and all that type of stuff, but I'm not bringing the people. So if I want to, I have to concede a couple of things in order to make, other big fights happen. You know what I mean? Shout out to Ill Will 85 there, of course, around the Philly area. He says, hey, he likes Coach Rell there in Richardson Hitchins' corner. Yeah, Coach Rell been, doing his thing there with Richardson Hitchins on that point. You know what I mean? has said 2 cents here in the building. Says Coach Real got the boys, letting them fly, throwing them punches. Yeah, as you really seen like, Richardson Hitchins just really like, open up his offense after being very consistent with the jab early in his fight against George Kambosos Jr. there at the theater in Madison Square Garden. So yeah, he definitely did his thing there on that front. My thing about it is that, with Richardson Hitchins, I want to see if he could kind of like be in that position to, fight for in a unification. Hey, I wouldn't mind it. You got, Subriel Matias. He's going to be fighting Alberto Puello, so you won't have to worry about Subriel Matias. You beat George Kambosos Jr. You already beat Liam Paro. I'm just going down the IBF rankings right now. So you already beat those guys. So unless if you're going to have like a voluntary defense, against a Kenny Sims Jr. or something, then why not go for a unification bout with Teofimo Lopez? Like I said, man, I got to hit up Keith Conley, man. I'm going to be like, yo, you got to see if you can do something in order to make that happen. You feel me?
Real quick, so 140 got Haney, Teofimo, Richardson, and Russell are the champions, right?
Haney ain't WBC champion. It's Alberto Puello. Haney's basically at 147. At least I put him at 147 at this point.
Okay.
So you got, like I said, Alberto Puello, Gary Antoine Russell, Richardson Hitchins, and Teofimo Lopez as the champions right now.
Okay.
And then, with the thing with Puello, he's going to be fighting Subriel Matias on July 12th, which I said that's going to be a great fight out there in New York, pretty much in Queens, New York, there for July 12th. So, we going to have some, more good fights there at 140 pounds. It's just that I want to see if Richardson Hitchins, where he fits at in the overall picture there at 140.
Got it.
Yeah, so I'm seeing here, like, that's why I was like, even though you were talking about the thing there with him and Devin Haney, I'm like, well, Devin Haney was the WBC champion, but ended up, giving up that belt. And then he fights Jose Carlos Ramirez at 143 pounds. So I'm like, well, if you're fighting Ramirez at 143 pounds, do you really have much of an intent to fight Richardson Hitchins at 140? No, because he mentioned they're on his on his Twitter account. He's like, hey, we can make it happen at 147. Let me see if I could pull that up here. He said, maybe it'd be at 147. He said we could get it at 147 pounds. So I mean that kind of like says like if Dev wants that fight, then he's like, hey, we could make it happen. But as you see here live on the thing there for YouTube or Rumble or whatever, he has that post there. He says we could get it at 147. You know what I mean? So there you go.
Okay.
So that's the whole situation there on that fight. Yeah, like I said, when we fight Hitchins at 147. Do you prefer Lopez versus Hitchins at 140 or Haney versus Hitchins at 147 or a catch weight? I prefer Lopez versus Hitchins at 140 unification. Why? Because as I was mentioning there with Teofimo Lopez, ever since his win that he had against Josh Taylor, what was that, in 2023? He hasn't had any unification bouts. Nothing. Not one. And given the history of him declining fights against Subriel Matias, declining a fight going up to 147 pounds to fight Brian Norman, it's like, what is he doing? And if Lopez says, hey, I don't even want to fight Devin Haney at like 143 pounds or whatever it is, or 145, if you have an intention to stay at 140, why not go after Richardson Hitchins and say that you've been a unified champion, not only in the 135-pound division, but also in the 140-pound division? Once again, Teofimo Lopez was a former unified champion at 135. Not undisputed, guys. Not undisputed. Hold on. What he says that Haney said, 147 for Teo and Hitchins. Yeah. So that's the thing about it. Devin Haney, man, he didn't really have that much time at 140 pounds. After he had his fights in 135, the George Kambosos fights and then the Vasily Lomachenko fight, he went up to 140. He had that win to get the WBC belt, and after he got that WBC belt against Regis Prograis, he didn't really spend that much time at 140 pounds. He said even at that time that he wasn't going to be spending that much time at 140. You know what I mean? So, hey, he at 47, he's at 47. Although there could be some really, attractive fights there at 147 pounds for Devin Haney, but, they just got to put him in that, correct position to do that. And, yeah, I did see Bill Haney there, speaking with Eddie Hearn after the fights took place or whatever. So, I don't know. Maybe they're going to have something set up for Devin Haney at 147 pounds later on down the line. I don't know.
Hey, question for you about Haney.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a Mayweather influence in regards to his fighting style? And what I mean by that, safety first, don't take too much punishment, and that will make your career just have longevity.
He doesn't necessarily take that many risks when it comes to offense. You did see that in his fight against Jose Carlos Ramirez. Those first few rounds, he was really reluctant to, throw that many shots. But once he kind of like saw some openings, he did kind of open up his offense there in a few occasions. But he didn't necessarily like go into second gear. I think he does have that type of mentality of try to be as efficient as possible. But I think he does have to have that instance where he has to step it up to another level, Even with that, he's still considered as one of those fighters that is among the top in not only where he was in his respective division, but in boxing overall. It's just that you just don't see him, taking that many risks there on that front.
I saw a video just while it's an older video. Him and Mayweather were training together, and Mayweather was basically telling him, "Don't take punishment. That will give your career longevity." And it kind of looks like he's just definitely doing that style. So I pose that question.
Yeah. And, some may think that, he might have a similar style to Mayweather, but that's like a Mayweather at 147 pounds. That's not the Mayweather we saw at 135. Nowhere close. We saw what Mayweather did at 135. He was absolutely crazy at 135 and whatnot. You know what I mean? So with Mayweather, after he had, his injuries to his hands there, and being at 147 and 154, then you saw him, take less offensive risk and just, have a style of, just, kind of like do pull counters, catch and slip and all that type of stuff. But Devin Haney, he has to build into that particular thing here, at least for me. I feel like he has to build into that here at this particular point. But if not, then he might have to kind of change his style up a little bit. Gorgio says that Richardson Hitchins has momentum there, of course, with his win over George Kambosos Jr. Teo dug himself in a hole with fans. Yeah. It was a big one or whatever it is. Hitchins might beat Lopez and become a star. That'd be interesting. That's the thing that's interesting to me, though, is that does Teofimo Lopez have enough heat to where people want to see him lose? That, we mentioned this thing here with Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather, very skilled, all that, very good and whatever. Had the wins there at 135, had a brief stint or whatnot at 140, and then, fought at 147. But it wasn't until he had the fight against Oscar De La Hoya to where they said, hey, he gets this win. It was a close win against Oscar De La Hoya, but, people, started to hate on him. But he ended up, having these appearances, Dancing with the Stars, WWF or WWE or whatever it is against the Big Show to put him, in that mainstream market to where now people could, see him fight. And when they see him fight, they're like, okay, who's this guy? Is he going to be able to beat him? Oh, he ain't beating him. Damn. Another fighter out there, Miguel Cotto. Could he beat him? Nope. Damn. Next guy up. So that's how he kind of like built his commercial success up to the point where he ultimately fought Manny Pacquiao and then Andre Berto, and then you had the whole thing there with Conor McGregor. So maybe with something like either one, with the Teofimo Lopez, or as we mentioned there with Devin Haney, maybe they got to put themselves in the right position to say, hey, we want to either see him win or see him lose. That's kind of like how some kind of view Tank at this point. He's very popular, box office success. You have a lot of fans that like him, root for him, but you also have a good number of fans that don't like Tank. Okay, but when it comes to the business of boxing, it doesn't matter if you like him or you hate him, as long as you still watching. That's all they care about. As long as you still watching, you still paying, that's all they care about. So that's why I say with Teofimo Lopez, he don't really have that type of pull yet. Even with what he's done, in the ring, still don't have that type of pull where it's like, oh, yeah, I could really be a fan of him. I'll support him, or I ain't really that much of a fan of him. I want to see him lose. Who they got going up against him to see if you could go ahead and beat up Teofimo Lopez. He really don't have that pull like that yet. So we got to see if that kind of like happens at this point. Now, with the same potentially with Richardson Hitchins is kind of, building himself as someone to be known overall in the scale of boxing. Those within boxing know who Richardson Hitchins is, but not really that many fans that haven't like caught up with them until recently. So if you have a bout between Hitchins and Teofimo Lopez, I mean, it's kind of right there for him to have it at Madison Square Garden, as both of them kind of have ties to Manhattan or Brooklyn or whatever. Yeah, so you could go ahead and have that fight. But is it big enough to, like, say, for example, have it at the big arena there at Madison Square Garden? I don't know. They have to, wait it out and see how that goes, because as of right now, Teofimo Lopez has no fight, and he's supposedly being on the top rank, and Top Rank really don't have a home, so to speak, when it comes to a network deal. So with that being said, who's going to fit the bill for Teofimo Lopez to have a fight? Turkey Al-Sheikh did it before in his bout against Arnold Barboza Jr. Could have done it here in a potential bout between Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney. That didn't happen. So are they going to do it here for Teofimo Lopez to go ahead and face Richardson Hitchins? Who knows? So we'll have to see how that goes on that front. But that's mainly what I had to cover here on this particular episode of the Boxing Source podcast. We got a world title fight that's coming up on Thursday over in Japan. You're gonna have Brian Norman Jr. there going up against Sasaki, right? And it'll be another defense for the WBO welterweight title. Okay. Brian Norman Jr. has been out there over in Japan for at least a couple weeks or something, getting his training down and everything to get ready for his bout against Jin Sasaki over in Oda City or whatever it is in Japan. And of course they had him tied to potentially fighting Jaron Ennis. As I mentioned here earlier, Jaron Ennis moving up to 154 pounds. So that fight between Boots and Brian Norman Jr., at least it ain't happening at 147 pounds. So now with Brian Norman, this is his opportunity to kind of like have an impressive win against the Jin Sasaki there, who's highly ranked there in the 147-pound division. And with Brian Norman being at 24 years old, he has a lot of time there that he could be at welterweight and potentially have another unification. You're going to have those IBF and WBA titles freed up now. So Brian Norman gets this win over Jin Sasaki. He could, go after whoever could eventually end up winning the IBF title. The WBA title could eventually be in the hands of Rolando Rolly Romero, because Rolly Romero is the interim champion, but he elevated to full champion unless the WBA says that Rolly Romero will go up against Giasov or something. But that would be funny. Rolly Romero could be the full-fledged WBA welterweight champion. Like there will be no other champions. You had Jaron Ennis as the super champion there for the WBA, and Rolly Romero as a WBA welterweight champion. So he could end up fighting Shakram Giasov. If he beats up Giasov, man, it's gonna be funny, man. Man, I'm telling you. But you know what we could have? What if we had Devin Haney versus Rolly Romero? That could be a possibility. Devin Haney is ranked number 2 in the WBA at welterweight, and he is like one step below Shakram Giasov. And I know that Giasov is the mandatory challenger of sorts, but they could have something. Maybe they could work out something where Devin Haney and Rolly Romero could end up fighting each other. Who knows? So that's one thing to watch out for with the WBA, given that you have Boots Ennis that has relinquished the IBF and WBA welterweight titles, and you have Shakram Giasov that, had been waiting in wings to fight for the WBA title. So now what's going to happen next? Are you going to have Rolly Romero fighting Shakram Giasov, or is it going to be an instance where Giasov gets paid, some money or whatever it is, in order for Rolly Romero and Devin Haney to fight each other for that WBA welterweight title? Who knows? That's all on that's all on Eddie Hearn. Is he gonna allow something like that to happen for Giasov to be paid step aside money once again? Who knows? You know what I mean? Just imagine Rolly Romero, KO, and Haney. Oh my goodness! That is a fight that could, really, have a little bit of buzz, man. You got, Rolly Romero, he knows how to sell a fight and anything like that. You got Devin Haney, who's kind of coming into his own to try to, talk, some trash here and there. But yeah, if Rolly Romero ended up stopping Devin Haney, man, that would have some people going crazy. I'm gonna just say that I'll have people going crazy. You know what I mean? So I like to see what would happen in that sense. I'll try to see if I can keep up with the WBA, see what they're gonna say about that welterweight title situation, because they had the whole thing with Rolly and Ryan on one side, and you had Boots and Shakram Giasov on the other side. But with Boots moving up, now how are they going to handle this? Are they going to go ahead and order Romero versus Shakram Giasov? Or will they have an instance where they could have Rolly fighting Devin Haney? That could be something. You know what I mean? That's the thing about it. Hey, if you're Giasov, would you keep taking step aside money? I doubt Rolly wants to fight him. I don't think he would. It's not like a situation that we had years ago with Eleider Alvarez being the WBC mandatory challenger to the light heavyweight title, which at the time was held by Adonis Stevenson. The reason why he kept taking step aside money over and over and over and over again was because both Stevenson and Eleider Alvarez were under the same promoter. The main reason why you were able to see Boots versus Stanionis was because Boots was there with Eddie Hearn and was able to pay off to have that fight with Stanionis and have Giasov be paid step aside money and be in the fight card there on April 12th of this year. This time around, you don't necessarily have that. So I don't know. And Shakram Giasov against Rolly Romero, I don't highly rate Giasov. I really don't. You know what I mean? So, Hey, it is what it is on that front. But that's what I got. Big thanks for everyone that's been able to listen in live, whether it's through YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, whatever it is. Big thanks for everyone for doing that. You can share the stream or share the podcast. We're going to try to work to get it in audio form that will be available on Spotify here. So if you're listening to the replay on Spotify, we appreciate you for listening in. And we'll have more here through the midweek report. That'll be before the fight that happens between Brian Norman Jr. and Jin Sasaki. So with that being said, I will catch y'all later, folks. Peace out.